afternoon. My name is Jeff Miller, and I'm the associate pastor here at the Meeting House. And I had the privilege of knowing the Bucher family for about 20 years. I moved to this area while I was in high school, and at the same age as Ben, and we went to the same youth group in this building, in this church family. And years later, I came back and was the youth pastor, and had the fortune of having Caleb as youth in that role and context. Many of you know that John is the middle son, and he is someone that I didn't spend as much time with Caleb and Ben, and I always wish I did, because I always enjoyed being around him. One of the things, common themes that I connected with John was that of soccer. I don't know if you guys are soccer fans, but I know John definitely was. It started at a young age. I remember in youth group, Ben and I and some of our friends would be playing around, and here comes John, smaller than us, but he didn't care. He jumped right in and played with us, enjoyed the challenge of playing with the older guys. He was sort of like the secret weapon. When we were making teams, I didn't want people to know that I wanted John on my team, but he was good, and I wanted him. I remember his face while he played, and just the passion, the energy that he displayed as he played. Fast forward to about 10, 12 years, I was inviting people to come to play soccer at Camp Hill prison nearby. We had periodically would play with some of the inmates there. And John and Caleb were nearby, or they were in town, and so I invited them to come and join us, and so they did. Now that kind of setting sometimes for some people would be intimidating, maybe make them shy, but I remember that wasn't the case with John. He was at peace at home, and he interacted the same with the players, with the inmates. I could see his authenticity and his care for people as he treated everyone. Not everyone just the same, it was more than that. I think one of the things that was unique about John is that he made everyone feel that they were special, that they mattered, and how he listened to them, just eye contact, and just he cared for them. Not to mention, he scored 2 goals that game. He loved to play, whether it was soccer, or recently I was told that he enjoyed playing basketball at our park nearby. And I was reminiscing with Caleb a couple weeks ago about how, in some ways, when John was at the playing field or court, that he, in some ways, came fully alive. That his passion for play and for people could come out. He was freed from some of the struggles that sometimes he dealt with. Another common note of John's life that I experienced through him and from hearing stories, some of you, and also posts on Facebook, was just this warm and tender heart that he had. And that he cared for people, he encouraged them, he offered to be help, whether that's advice or any way he could. He wasn't afraid to tangibly show people that he cared. And so this past week I was putting together this slideshow that you'll see in a little bit of John's life. And that's illustrated in some of his pictures, some of the same characteristics of his life. And in doing so, it's bittersweet. In one sense, it was neat to celebrate the life that John lived, the gift it was. But also, it was a reminder of just how tragic it is of his loss. And as I'm looking through these pictures, this emotion shouts out, this should not be so. We should not all be here. Scott and Cindy, you should not be mourning your son. He had so many years to live, to love, and to grow. And it reminded me of how much this world is sick. I think we can't ignore that if we see our our own lives, our hearts, our minds, the world that we live in, that it's ill in some ways. In the Bible, a man named Paul, he said it this way. He said, "We know that all creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth, right up to the present time." All creation is groaning. It's groaning in the bloody streets of Syria. It's groaning in the lack of clean water in Africa. It's groaning in the rupture of relationships that we go through when people choose their freedom to hurt rather than heal. It's groaning when we lose a loved one. Those who knew John knew that his life was not a rose garden, that he was well acclimated to our groaning world as he battled various struggles for a lot of his adult life. And it's those battles and that groaning, that sickness that ultimately took him from us. So many, like me, when this world's sickness crashes on us, we experience various different emotions. And I just want to touch on a few emotions today. The first is that of anger. And just talking to Scott in the last couple weeks, that is there. I thought about an analogy of cancer. Many of you here have been affected by the wreckage of cancer on people that you've loved, and maybe yourself as well. And that's gotten you angry. Angry at the pain and hurt that it's caused. Anger that you can't do anything about it. Anger that life is just unfair. I think that's a lot of how I feel, and I think of John's loss, that I'm not being able to do anything about that, on some of his struggles, and just be angry that it's unfair. And that emotion is perfectly natural and good. Some of you might be familiar with the story in the Bible of Jesus. He has a friend, a cousin, who passes away, named Lazarus. And he journeys to Lazarus' home, and he meets Lazarus' sister at the funeral. And it says this: "When Jesus saw her sobbing, and the Jews with her sobbing, a deep anger welled up within him." Jesus experienced this kind of anger. Anger at the injustice, anger at the pain, anger at death itself and the harm that it does to those that he loved. So Jesus joins us in our anger. Many also are experiencing this deep sense of grief and loss. It's sadness over John's death. Sometimes it can be dulled by our responsibilities or distractions. Other times it's painful, it's sharp, it's real. Loving someone is risky. It's risky. It's because it requires freedom. So when God created a world where love is possible, a free world where love is possible, it also created a world where pain is possible. So when we open our hearts up to people in our lives to love and care for them, we also open up the possibility that we'll feel pain and hurt. And so the grief that we share is in some ways a good thing, because it shows us that we cared and we loved. That though pain is real, that's worth it. At the gravesite with his friend Lazarus, we see Jesus angry, but his anger soon turns to grief. It says that Jesus approached the tomb, and we read that Jesus wept. Jesus wept. It's not just a few tears. It's this word of Jesus sobbing. And the people around him said, "Wow, look at how much he loved him." So Jesus joins us in our grief and our sadness. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, if God's angry and sad over tragedy, why doesn't he do anything about it? a good question. I believe he has, and that leads me to this last emotion that I want to touch on, that of hope. Now, some of you are still in the deep valley of sadness and grief and anger, not quite there with hope, and that's okay. It's a journey that we are on. But personally, I find hope most of all in the person of Jesus, who is our clearest picture of who God is. So in the story of Lazarus, Jesus experiences this anger and grief that we all experienced here today, but it doesn't end there. Jesus wanted to make clear that suffering and pain and the groaning and sickness and the evil and death was not the last word. Life has the last word. Restoration has the last word. Hope has the last word. So he brings Lazarus back to life. He did so we can clearly see that God's heart in the midst of tragedy is for life, for healing, both in this life and also throughout eternity. That death sting is only temporary. God has the final word. So in Jesus, I have hope. In Jesus, I see a God who cares about awakening our hearts to his way, the way of kindness, generosity, putting others first, all things that I see God living out in the life of John. I see a God who stands with us in our suffering, who identifies with us in our heartache and pain. I see a God who taught and modeled the way of love that can heal and calls us out to live that kind of love into a world in need. And I see a God who's working alongside us to make that happen, until one day he will make everything right. And that's what we all long for. Whether you have faith or not, that one day that things will be made right. The Bible hints at this hope throughout Scriptures. It says, he will wipe every tear away from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the order of things has passed away. He who is seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. Jesus talks about this as well, about the renewing of everything. And others talk about the restoration and reconciliation of all things. Or some today talk about love wins. I don't know about you, but that's a good story. It's the kind of story I want to put my hope in. And it's the kind of story and hope that not just one I want to hope in, I want to participate in, into the restoring, healing, and reconciliation work of God. And it's that hope that Jesus wants to restore everything that I cling to when I think about John and the loss of his life. It's the hope that John is being renewed, he's being restored, and that he's at peace, and that he is running and playing in the love of his Creator. So may that hope that I have, that many of you have, sustain us as we move forward. Let's pray. Oh, gracious God, life is a gift. Our breath is a gift, and we thank you for the life of John, the gift that he was. Walk beside us in our anger, in our grief, in our sadness, in the ache that we have. May you lift up our eyes, though, to that of hope. Amen.
Thank you, Jeff. A couple verses later, a couple chapters later in the Gospel of John, Jesus said, after giving the disciples and the followers of him several things that were going to happen that were really devastating, Jesus was about to die. And he says that he tells us these things so that we may have peace.